6 months later, spring came to Balmoral. The hills turned green. Wildflowers bloomed across the meadows. The castle grounds filled with life and color and the kind of beauty that made you believe in renewal. Thomas was still at his post, still standing guard over the king's study, still protecting the safe that held secrets he would never know. The routine had returned to normal. Quiet days, peaceful nights, the kind of service that rarely made headlines or demanded heroism. But Thomas had learned something in those months, had come to understand a truth that changed everything. Heroism wasn't always loud, wasn't always visible. Sometimes it was simply showing up, doing your duty, keeping your word when no one was watching and when everyone who mattered had already moved on to other concerns. One afternoon in April, as Thomas stood at his usual post, the study door opened. Queen Camilla entered, carrying a tea tray. She set it down on the desk. Then she turned to Thomas with a warm smile. "Would you join me for a moment?" she asked. "The king is napping. We won't be disturbed." Thomas hesitated. This was unusual, irregular, but something in her expression told him it mattered. That this wasn't a command but a request. A genuine one. "Of course, ma'am," he said. She poured 2 cups of tea, handed him one. They sat in the chairs by the window, the spring sunlight streaming through the glass. "I've been meaning to speak with you," Camilla began, properly. Not as queen consort to guard, but as one human being to another. Thomas waited, uncertain where this was going. "When you refused me, when you stood there, so young and so certain, and told me no, I was angry at first, hurt. I felt dismissed, disrespected, like I didn't matter." She took a sip of tea, looked out at the hills, but then I started thinking, really thinking, about what you'd done, about why Charles had chosen someone like you for this position. And I realized something important, something I'd forgotten in my years of being part of this family. She turned to face him directly. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I realized that the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the protection of their choices, even when those choices exclude you, even when they hurt. Because love isn't about possession. It's not about knowing everything or controlling everything or being included in every corner of someone's life. It's about respecting their right to be whole, to be private, to be human in ways that are theirs alone." Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Ma'am, let me finish," she said gently. "Please, because I need you to hear this. I need you to understand what you taught me that night." She set down her teacup, folded her hands in her lap. "For years I've been trying so hard to be enough, to be the right kind of wife, the right kind of queen, to earn my place in this family and in the hearts of people who had every reason to reject me. And somewhere in all that trying, I forgot that Charles doesn't need me to be everything. He needs me to be myself, and to let him be himself, fully, without apology, without explanation." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "You reminded me of that. By refusing me, by standing there so stubborn and so loyal and so absolutely certain that some boundaries exist for good reasons, you gave me back something I'd lost. The ability to trust that Charles's privacy isn't a rejection of me. It's a gift to himself. One he's earned. One he deserves." Thomas felt tears in his own eyes now. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." "No," Camilla said firmly. "Thank you for being the kind of man who keeps his word, who honors his commitments, who understands that real love requires space, requires mystery, requires the willingness to not know everything." She stood, moved to the window, gazed out at the gardens below. "Do you know what Charles told me last week?" she asked. "He said that he's going to write another letter, to be added to that safe, a letter for me, about all the things he's never said, all the gratitude and love and complicated feelings that he keeps private because that's who he is. And he said that when he's ready, when the time is right, he'll give it to me himself." She turned back to Thomas. Her face was radiant with emotion. "And I realize that I'm content to wait, however long it takes, because the knowing will be so much sweeter for the waiting, because his choice to share will will mean so much more than my demand to see. Because you taught me that patience is a form of love, that respecting boundaries is an act of devotion.
House.
Thomas stood, set down his teacup. Ma'am, I think you've given the king something even more precious. You've given him the freedom to be imperfect, to be private, to be human without fear of losing you. Camilla's smile was beautiful. Perhaps we've given each other something. Perhaps that's what family is, teaching each other how to love better, how to hold each other without holding each other back. She moved toward the door, paused. Thomas, I don't know what your plans are, whether you'll stay in this position for years or move on to other things. But I want you to know that you've made a difference here. Not just to Charles, to all of us. You've shown us what loyalty looks like when it's tested, what integrity means when it's inconvenient, what honor is when no one's watching. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. No, she said softly. You're doing something far more important. You're keeping faith. And in a world that increasingly treats faith as foolishness that makes you extraordinary, the study felt larger in her absence. Quieter, but also fuller somehow. Rich with meaning, with connection, with the understanding that what happened here mattered. Not just to the people directly involved, but to the idea of what service meant, what duty required, what love could be when it was strong enough to let go. Thomas returned to his post beside the safe, placed his hand on the cool metal, felt the weight of what it contained. The letters, the memories, the private thoughts of a king who was also a man, a father, a husband, a human being trying to do his best in impossible circumstances. And Thomas understood, with perfect clarity, why he was here, why he'd been chosen, why he'd stood his ground that stormy night and every day since. Because some things are worth protecting. Not with violence, not with force, but with the quiet, unshakable determination to keep your word, to honor trust, to believe that privacy matters, that dignity is sacred, that even kings deserve the right to be fully themselves without apology or explanation. The afternoon sun moved across the floor. Dust motes danced in the golden light. Somewhere in the castle, the king was sleeping peacefully, recovering, healing, safe in the knowledge that his secrets were guarded, that his humanity was protected, that his trust had not been misplaced. And Thomas Hartley, former Royal Marine, current guardian of things unseen, stood at his post. Not because he had to, not because he was ordered to, but because he'd made a promise. And promises, real promises, were kept no matter what. No matter who asked, no matter how hard it became. That was loyalty. That was honor. That was what it meant to serve something greater than yourself. Not the institution, not the crown, not the pageantry or the power or the prestige, but the human beings behind all of it. The ones who trusted you to protect what they couldn't protect themselves. The ones who needed to know that somewhere. In a world of constant exposure and relentless scrutiny, there was still a corner of privacy, a sanctuary of self, a place where they could be wholly, completely, imperfectly human. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, felt the sun warm on his face, felt the weight of the letter still in his pocket, the one the king had given him months ago. He'd read it only once, had memorized every word, every line, every expression of gratitude and trust and profound respect, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would stand at this post as long as he was needed, would guard this safe, would protect these secrets, would honor this trust, because that was his calling, his purpose, his way of making the world just a little bit better, one kept promise at a time, one honored boundary at a time, one act of faithful service at a time, and that, in the end, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Charles reached into his jacket pocket, drew out a small leather folder, opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter on royal stationery, the king's own handwriting, distinctive and flowing. "This is for you," Charles said, handing it to Thomas. "Not to be opened now, to be kept, to be read when you need reminding of why what you do matters." Why standing firm in the face of pressure is sometimes the greatest service you can offer. Thomas took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind of thing you kept forever, the kind of thing you showed your grandchildren someday with quiet pride. "Thank you, sir," he managed. "No, Thomas. Thank you." Charles leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. But there was peace there, too. Contentment. "There's something else. Something I want you to know. About what's in that safe." Thomas stiffened slightly. "Sir, you don't need to. I want to," Charles insisted. "Because you've earned the right to understand what you were protecting. Not the details. Never the details. But the principle?" He looked toward the window. The Scottish hills were visible in the distance, green and eternal. "When my mother died," Charles began, his voice soft with memory, "I inherited everything that comes with being king. The power. The responsibility. The weight of 1,000 years of history pressing down on your shoulders. But I also lost something. I lost the luxury of being simply myself. Of having thoughts that were mine alone. Feelings that didn't have to be managed or explained or justified." He turned back to Thomas. "So I made a decision. I took the letters my mother wrote to me in her final months. Letters that were raw and honest and full of things she'd never said publicly. Things about her fears, her regrets, her hopes for me. And I locked them in that safe. Along with my own writings, my own private thoughts about being king, about the cost of duty, about the man I was before this crown and the man I'm trying to remain despite it." Thomas listened, barely breathing. This was unprecedented. Kings didn't share this kind of vulnerability. Didn't pull back the curtain on their humanity. Not like this. "And there's a document," Charles continued. "My real wishes. Not the official ones that lawyers draft and politicians approve. But the true ones. About what I want for my family if I die. About how I hope they'll remember me. About the small, human things that matter more than any state funeral or official mourning period." His voice caught slightly. He cleared his throat, steadied himself. "That document contains my permission," he said. "Permission for my family to grieve privately, to not be strong for the cameras, to take time away from duty, to simply be sad. Because I've seen what public grief does to people. What it did to my sons when their mother died, what it did to me when my father passed. And I wanted them to know that I didn't require perfection from them. Didn't need them to sacrifice their hearts for appearances." Thomas felt tears running down his cheeks now. He couldn't stop them. Didn't try. "That's what you protected," Charles said softly. "Not state secrets. Not scandal. But humanity. The right of a father to tell his children that their pain matters more than protocol. The right of a husband to share his whole self with his wife when he chooses. On his terms. In his time, the silence that followed was profound, sacred." "I understand now, sir," Thomas said finally. "I understand what was at stake. I hoped you would." Charles smiled. "And I hope you'll continue to understand. To stand guard not just over that safe, but over that principle. That even kings deserve privacy. Even rulers get to keep something for themselves. Even public figures have the right to an inner life that remains their own." Thomas nodded. "I will, sir. I swear it. I know you will. That's why you're here." Charles stood again slowly, extended his hand. "One more thing before you go. About Camilla." Thomas's stomach tightened. He'd almost forgotten the complication. The woman he'd refused. The queen he'd essentially denied. "She's not angry with you," Charles said, reading his expression. "She's the opposite. She told me yesterday that you taught her something important. That loving someone doesn't mean possessing all of them. That respecting someone means honoring their boundaries even when you don't understand them. Even when they hurt." He squeezed Thomas's hand firmly. "She asked me to thank you. For protecting me from her own love. From the instinct to know everything, fix everything, control everything out of fear. She said you gave her a gift. The gift of trusting that I knew what I needed, even if I wasn't there to say it." Thomas felt his throat close with emotion. She's a remarkable woman, sir. She is, Charles agreed. And she's learning, as we all are, that the strongest love is the one that can let go. That can respect mystery. That can guard someone's dignity, even at the cost of its own peace of mind. He released Thomas's hand, gestured toward the door. Go on now. Get some rest. You've had a harder week than most people have in a lifetime. And Thomas turned back. Sir, never doubt that what you did mattered. Never let anyone convince you that loyalty without compromise is outdated or unreasonable or too rigid for modern times. The world needs people who keep their word, who honor their commitments, who understand that some things are worth protecting even when protection looks like stubbornness. Yes, sir, I understand. Thomas left the study, walked through the corridor on legs that felt both weak and strong at the same time. The letter from the king was folded carefully in his pocket, heavy, precious, a reminder that would last a lifetime. He passed other guards, other staff members. They looked at him with curiosity, with respect, with questions they didn't dare ask. But Thomas didn't owe them explanations, didn't need their approval or understanding. He knew what he'd done, knew why it mattered, knew that somewhere in that study, in that ornate Victorian safe, was proof that humanity still existed at the highest levels, that even kings could be human, that even the most public lives could contain private sanctuaries. And he, Thomas Hartley, former Royal Marine, current Royal Guard, had been trusted to protect that sanctuary, not with weapons, not with force, but with something far more powerful, with the simple, unshakable refusal to compromise his word, even when compromise seemed kind, even when refusal seemed cruel, even when the easiest path was to give in and let someone else decide what mattered. He'd stood his ground, had kept faith, had honored trust when trust was tested, and that, he realized as he stepped outside into the cool Scottish afternoon, was worth more than all the medals and commendations and public recognition in the world. That was worth everything. 3 days passed. Thomas continued his duties as if nothing had happened, standing guard, keeping watch, maintaining the routine that gave structure to Palace's life. But something had changed. People looked at him differently now. Word had spread, as it always does in royal households, about the guard who refused a queen. Some of the staff treated him with new respect. Others avoided his eyes, as if loyalty that strong made them uncomfortable, made them question their own limits. Thomas didn't mind either reaction. He hadn't made his choice for recognition, hadn't stood his ground for approval. He'd done it because it was right, because his word meant something, because in a world that increasingly treated principles as negotiable, someone had to hold the line. On the 4th morning, a message came. The king was being released from hospital. He would return to Balmoral that afternoon to continue his recovery. The news rippled through the castle like electricity, relief, joy, the kind of collective exhale that happens when fear finally releases its grip. Thomas was in the guard quarters, polishing his boots when his supervisor appeared in the doorway. Commander Phillips was a severe man in his 60s, weathered by decades of military service and royal protocol. His face rarely showed emotion. But today, there was something different in his expression, something almost like pride. "Hartley," he said, "you're wanted in the king's study." 1,500 hours. Thomas's heart skipped. "Sir, His Majesty wishes to see you." Upon his arrival, Phillips paused, then added more quietly, "Well done, son." He left before Thomas could respond. Before Thomas could process what was happening, the king wanted to see him, personally. The implications were staggering. Had someone told him about that night? About Camilla's request? About the confrontation that nearly broke the rules of duty and compassion? Or was this about something else entirely? Thomas couldn't eat lunch, couldn't focus on anything except the clock slowly ticking toward 3 o'clock. He changed into his dress uniform, made sure every button gleamed, every crease was sharp. If the king wanted to see him, he would present himself perfectly, would show that the trust placed in him was not misplaced. At exactly 3 o'clock, Thomas stood outside the study door. His palms were sweating. His heart was racing. He'd faced combat situations with less nervousness, had stood in firefights with more calm, but this was different. This was personal. The door opened. A private secretary gestured him inside. "His Majesty will see you now." Thomas entered. The study looked the same as it had that stormy night. Same furniture. Same lamplight. Same ornate safe in the corner. But now, sitting in the leather chair, looking thinner and paler, but very much alive, was King Charles himself. He looked tired. The illness had taken its toll, but his eyes were clear, sharp, missing nothing. "Thomas Hartley," the king said. His voice was softer than Thomas expected. Warmer. "Please, sit." Thomas remained standing. "Sir, I prefer to. I'm not asking as your king," Charles interrupted gently. "I'm asking as a man who needs to have a conversation without his neck. Cramping from looking up, please. Sit." Sat carefully, maintaining perfect posture, even in the informal chair across from the king. Charles studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. A real smile that transformed his tired face into something almost mischievous. "I understand you refused my wife," he said. Thomas's blood ran cold. "Sir, I don't apologize." Charles held up a hand. "I'm not angry. I'm grateful. Profoundly grateful. Do you know why?" Thomas shook his head, not trusting his voice. "'Cause you did exactly what I needed you to do." "What I trusted you to do when I gave you this position?" Charles leaned forward slightly. "Thomas, I've been in public life for over 7 decades. I've been surrounded by people my entire existence. Some loyal, some ambitious, some simply doing their jobs. But very few, vanishingly few, who understand the difference between serving me and serving what I represent." He paused. Let the words sink in. "That safe," Charles continued, gesturing toward it, "contains things that are mine alone. Not the crown's, not the institution's. Mine. Private thoughts. Private fears. Private moments of humanity that I've kept separate from the role I play for the world. And I needed to know that someone could protect that privacy. Even from people I love. Even in emergencies. Even when it seemed cruel or stubborn or unnecessarily rigid." Thomas felt something unlock in his chest. The weight he'd been carrying for 3 days suddenly felt lighter. "You gave me something precious," Charles said quietly. "You gave me proof that I could trust you, that my secrets were safe, that even in my absence, even in crisis, the walls I'd built around my private self would hold. Do you understand how rare that is? How valuable?" "I was just following orders, sir." "No." Charles shook his head firmly. "You are honoring trust. There's a profound difference. Following orders is mechanical. Honoring trust is spiritual. It requires judgment, courage, the willingness to be misunderstood, to be seen as cold or heartless when you're actually being the opposite." He stood slowly, carefully, moved toward the safe, placed his hand on it with an almost affectionate gesture. "Camilla told me everything," he said. "About that night, about her request, about your refusal, about William's decision not to open it even though he could have. And I want you to know something, Thomas. I want you to understand how much that meant to me." He turned to face Thomas directly. "When I was lying in that hospital bed, fighting through fever and pain and fear, I had one clear thought, one anchor that kept me steady. I thought, my private wishes are safe. My secret thoughts are protected. The man I am when no one's watching, when the crown is off, when the duty ends, that man is still mine alone. Until I choose to share him, until I decide the time is right." Tears gathered in Charles's eyes. He didn't wipe them away. "You gave me that? You and William. You gave me dignity when I was at my most vulnerable. You refused to let even love become an excuse to violate my boundaries. And I will never forget that." Thomas felt his own eyes burning. He blinked hard, fought to maintain composure. Sir, it was my honor to serve you. To protect what you asked me to protect, I know. Charles returned to his chair, sat with a small sigh of fatigue. But honor should be recognized. Loyalty should be rewarded, not with medals or public acknowledgement. Those would miss the point entirely, but with trust, deeper trust. Camilla rose from the chair. For a moment, she and William simply looked at each other. The relationship between them had always been complicated. Years of history, years of healing, years of trying to become family when the world kept reminding them of everything that stood between them. But in that moment, in that study at 3 a.m, something passed between them. Understanding. Shared fear. Shared relief. I'm sorry, Camilla said softly. Not tonight. Not when you were finally resting. But I thought. She stopped, collected herself. There's a document in the safe. Your father mentioned it to me once. It's private wishes. If something happened, I thought we might need it. William's expression softened slightly. Just slightly. He understood fear, understood the instinct to prepare for the worst, even while praying for the best. He's going to be fine, William said, though his voice carried the weight of someone trying to convince himself as much as her. The doctors said the next 48 hours are critical, but he's stable, he's strong, he's fought through worse. Thomas remained silent, still at attention, still guarding. But inside, his heart was hammering, because he suddenly understood something crucial, something that changed the entire night. If William opened that safe now, Camilla would see whatever was inside, would learn secrets the king had kept even from his wife. And William would have to decide, in the space of seconds, whether to honor his father's privacy or his stepmother's need to know. It was an impossible position, the kind that could shatter families, could create wounds that never healed. William approached the safe. His hand went to his pocket, pulled out a small silver key on a simple chain. He had been carrying it for years. Since the day his father had given it to him with solemn words and serious eyes. This is trust, Charles had said. Use it wisely. Use it only when absolutely necessary. Was this necessary? William stood there, key in hand, staring at the safe. The metal gleamed in the lamplight, solid, impenetrable, full of secrets that suddenly felt too heavy to bear.
Thomas,
William said quietly, not turning around. You refused to open this for the Queen Consort. It wasn't a question, but it demanded an answer. Yes, sir, Thomas replied. His voice was steady. My orders were clear. Only His Majesty or yourself. And if she had threatened you, promised to have you dismissed? Thomas didn't hesitate. The orders would remain the same, sir. For the first time that night, William smiled. A small, tired smile, but genuine.
Good.
My father chose well. He turned to face Thomas fully, extended his hand. Thomas, surprised, shook it. William's grip was firm, grateful. Thank you, William said simply, for understanding what loyalty really means. Then William turned to Camilla. She was watching him with an expression that was hard to read. Hopeful, fearful, resigned. I'm not going to open it, William said gently. Camilla's face fell. William, not because I don't trust you, he continued quickly, and not because I don't understand why you need to see it, but because my father's alive. He's going to recover. When he does, he deserves to make the choice himself. It's about what you see. It's about what you know. Tears spilled down Camilla's cheeks then. She didn't try to hide them. What if you're wrong? What if something changes? What if then I'll come back? William promised. The moment anything changes, I'll drive here myself and open it. You have my word. But right now, tonight, while he's still fighting, while there's still hope, I won't take that choice away from him. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, with respect. With the son's fierce protection of his father's dignity, Camilla wiped her eyes, nodded slowly. You're like him, you know. It's more than you realize. Stubborn, principled, impossible to move once you've made up your mind. William's smile widened just a fraction. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. She moved toward the door, paused, looked back at Thomas. I owe you an apology. I put you in an impossible position tonight. Asked you to choose between duty and compassion. That wasn't fair. Thomas shook his head. No apology necessary, ma'am. You were protecting someone you love. I was doing the same. We were both right. Something shifted in Camilla's expression. Respect. Warmth. The kind of look that said she truly saw him now. Not as an obstacle. Not as a stubborn guard. But as a man of honor being an honorable thing. Good night, Thomas, she said softly. Thank you. Good night, ma'am. She left. Her footsteps faded down the corridor. The study felt larger without her presence. Emptier. William remained standing by the safe. He held the key up, watching it catch the light. Do you know what's in here, Thomas? No, sir. That's not my place to know. Good answer. William pocketed the key. But I'll tell you something. My father told me once that this safe holds the difference between the king he is and the man he was. Between duty and desire. Between what the world sees and what he truly feels. He turned to face Thomas directly. That's why it matters so much. That's why men like you exist. 'Cause some truths are too important, too personal, too vulnerable to ever risk being exposed before their time. Completely. Deeply. Deeply. My father will want to thank you himself when he's better, William continued. But I'll say it now. What you did tonight, refusing the queen consort, standing your ground when it would have been so much easier to give in, that's the kind of loyalty that keeps kingdoms standing, the kind that lasts. No, William shook his head. You were keeping faith. There's a difference. He moved toward the door. Stopped. Looked back one more time at the safe. At Thomas standing beside it. At the scene that would never make headlines, would never be. Recorded in history books, but mattered more than most people would ever know. Get some rest, William said. You've earned it. I'll remain on duty until my shift ends at 6, sir. William laughed then. A real laugh. Surprising and genuine. Of course you will. Stubborn Marines, yes, sir. After William left, Thomas stood alone in the study. The storm had completely passed. Through the windows, he could see the first hint of dawn touching the Scottish hills. Pink and gold and impossibly beautiful. He thought about the night, about choices and loyalty, and the thin line between helping and betraying. About how the hardest thing you can do for someone you serve is refuse them what they want in order to give them what they need. The rain hammered against the windows of Balmoral Castle that October evening. Inside the king's private study, a tall guard named Thomas Hartley stood at attention beside an ornate Victorian safe. His face was pale, his hands were steady, but his heart was racing. Queen Camilla stood 3 feet away, her expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. Behind her, 2 senior royal advisors waited in uncomfortable silence. The air felt thick, heavy, like the moment before lightning strikes. I need you to open it, Camilla said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, command wrapped in courtesy. Thomas didn't move, kept his eyes forward, trained on the wall beyond her shoulder. His jaw tightened. 20 minutes passed like 20 hours. Thomas remained at his post beside the safe. His legs were beginning to ache, but he didn't shift his stance. Couldn't. To move now would feel like weakness. It's like doubt creeping in. Camilla had dismissed the advisors. Now it was just the 2 of them in the study. She sat in the king's leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't spoken since making the decision to wait. But her presence filled the room like a physical thing. Thomas could feel her watching him, studying him, trying to understand what kind of man would refuse a queen. The truth was simpler than she probably imagined. He was the kind of man who remembered every word of his oath, who had stood in a ceremony room 3 years ago and sworn on his life to protect the king's secrets, to guard what was private, to never ever compromise. Not for money, not for power, not even for mercy. How long have you served? Camilla asked suddenly. Thomas blinked. The question caught him off guard. 3 years, ma'am, since 2023. Before that, Royal Marines. 8 years. She nodded slowly. A small, sad smile touched her lips. So you're familiar with following orders even when they seem unreasonable. It wasn't really a question, but Thomas answered anyway. Yes, ma'am, I am. Another silence fell between them. This one felt different, less hostile. more like two people trapped in a situation neither one wanted. Both doing what they believed was right, both paying a price for it. "I need to tell you something," Camilla said finally. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "And I need you to understand why this matters. Why I pushed so hard." Thomas remained silent, listening. "Inside that safe," she continued, "there are letters. Private correspondence between Charles and his mother, written in her final months. Never let anyone read them. Not me, not William, no one." She paused. Her hands tightened in her lap. "But there's also something else. A document. Charles told me about it once, years ago. Contains his wishes, his real wishes, not the official ones that everyone knows about, the personal ones, about what happens if her voice cracked. Just slightly, just enough to reveal the fear underneath. If he doesn't recover," she finished, "if the worst happens, that document contains instructions that could change everything. For the family, for the country." Thomas felt his chest tighten. He understood now. This wasn't about power, wasn't about control. This was about a wife terrified that her husband might die and she wouldn't know his final wishes, wouldn't be able to honor them, wouldn't get to say goodbye the way he wanted. It was about love, desperate, frightened love, and it made his refusal so much harder. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm truly sorry, but my orders I know." She held up a hand, stopping him. "I know, Thomas, and you're right to refuse. Charles chose you for this position because he knew you'd be the kind of man who wouldn't break, who couldn't be convinced or manipulated or pressured into compromising." She stood, walked slowly toward him, stopped just close enough that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. Tears she refused to let fall. "He trusted you to protect his privacy, even from the people who love him," she said. "Even from me. Especially from me, 'cause he knows that love can make us do desperate things. And some secrets need to be kept until the right moment, the right person." Thomas felt something shift inside him, not doubt, not regret, something else. A deep, aching respect for the woman standing before him. For the strength it took to accept rejection when your heart was breaking, to honor your husband's wishes even when it hurt. "He's going to be all right," Thomas said. It wasn't his place to offer comfort, but he couldn't help himself. "The king is strong. He'll recover." Camilla smiled then. A real smile, fragile but genuine. "I hope you're right." She returned to the chair, sat down, straightened her shoulders. When she spoke again, her voice was composed. "Royal, we'll wait for William, however long it takes." Thomas nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened to a steady patter. The wind died down. Inside the study, two people who barely knew each other sat in shared silence, both guarding something precious, both refusing to break. And somewhere in London, in a hospital room filled with beeping machines and worried faces, a king slept, unaware that his trust was being tested, unaware that it was holding firm. The hours ticked by. Midnight came and went. Camilla dozed in the chair, her head tilted to one side. Thomas remained standing, alert, ready, guarding the safe, guarding the secrets, guarding the oath he'd made to a man who believed in him. Then, at exactly 2:47, in the morning, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Fast, urgent, heavy. The door burst open. Prince William stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were red from exhaustion or tears or both. He was still wearing the casual clothes he'd thrown on when he got the call. Jeans, a wrinkled shirt. No jacket despite the cold. He looked at Thomas, then at Camilla, who had jerked awake at the sound. "He's stable," William said, his voice hoarse. "He's going to make it." The relief that flooded the room was almost tangible, but William didn't smile, didn't relax. His jaw was set, his expression grim. "Now," he said, walking toward the safe, "tell me why I had to drive through the night to get here. Tell me what's so urgent it couldn't wait until morning." "Ma'am," he began, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. "I cannot do that." The silence that followed was deafening. One of the advisors shifted his weight. The floorboard creaked beneath him. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed 8 times. Each chime felt like a countdown. Camilla took a small step closer. She studied Thomas's face, searching for weakness, for hesitation. She found none. "This is a direct request from the Queen Consort," she said, her tone still measured but firmer now. "The king is in hospital. There are documents inside that safe we need. Time-sensitive matters. Surely you understand." Thomas did understand. King Charles had been rushed to London just 6 hours earlier. A sudden illness. Serious enough that the entire royal household had been thrown into chaos. Serious enough that protocol was being tested in ways it hadn't been tested in decades. But protocol existed for a reason, Mem Thomas said again. And this time he allowed himself to meet her gaze. "With all due respect, my orders are absolute. That safe can only be opened by the king himself or by the Prince of Wales. No one else. Not under any circumstances." The words hung in the air like smoke. One of the advisors, a thin man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Surely in an emergency situation, we can make an exception. The Queen Consort has authority, the king's." "Personal safe is governed by different rules," Thomas interrupted, his voice respectful but unyielding. "It was made clear to me when I took this post. Those rules do not bend. Not for emergencies. Not for anyone." Camilla's expression shifted. Not anger exactly. Something more complex. Hurt, perhaps. Or frustration mixed with a grudging respect. She had been part of this family long enough to know that some traditions were iron. Some lines could not be crossed. But she also knew what was at stake. "William is in Scotland," she said. "He won't be here until morning." By then, she stopped herself, took a breath. "Thomas, I am not asking you to betray your duty. I am asking you to help your king." It was a masterful appeal, emotional, direct, the kind of argument that could make a loyal man doubt himself, could make him wonder if holding the line was truly the right thing to do. Thomas felt the weight of it, the pressure. Every instinct told him to help, to make an exception just this once, because wasn't that what loyalty meant? Doing whatever it took? But deep down, he knew the answer. Real loyalty meant keeping your word even when it hurt, even when it looked like stubbornness, even when the person you served couldn't see you doing it. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said softly. "I cannot open that safe." The rain grew louder against the windows. The storm was getting worse. And in that study, surrounded by centuries of history and tradition, a young guard had just made a choice that would change everything. If you're invested in this story, subscribe now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Camilla turned away from Thomas. She walked slowly to the window, her silhouette framed against the dark Scottish night. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then we wait for William." But they both knew that waiting might cost them everything.